Hey, welcome back to The Explainer. You know, you scroll through YouTube or Instagram these days, and investing, it looks so simple, right? It feels like you're just one click, one hot tip away from making a fortune. But behind all that hype, there are some really hard truths. So today, let's get into the playbook they don't teach you in those videos. All right, so let's just cut to the chase and ask the big question. Is investing really a shortcut to getting rich? I mean, it's such a tempting thought, and it's plastered all over the internet. But here's the thing. The people who are truly successful at this, they know that real wealth isn't built on shortcuts. It's built on discipline. You know, the legendary investor Bernard Baruch, and we're talking a real market titan here, he absolutely nailed this. He said the main problem of the stock market is that you think it's a place where you can get rich without working. Just let that sink in. That one idea, it's pretty much the root cause of almost every major investing mistake out there. And that leads us perfectly into our first section here, the simple investing trap. Look, just because it's easy to get started with investing today doesn't mean the process itself is easy. Confusing those two things, that is one of the biggest traps you can fall into. So many people treat investing almost like entertainment, right? It's a fun topic for conversation, something to talk about with friends. But as financial expert Davina Mera points out, real successful investing, it's not about the exciting stories. Honestly, it's a pretty boring, disciplined process. So you really have to ask yourself, are you in this for the conversation, or are you in it for the results? Okay, let's move on to our next section, because this is where we need to talk about your portfolio's biggest risks. And we're going to dig into two of the most common and, frankly, most dangerous assumptions people make when they invest. You hear this all the time, especially from younger investors, right? Hey, I'm young, I've got a 30-year runway, a steady job. Why wouldn't I go 100% into stocks to get the biggest returns? And look, on the surface, that sounds super logical. But when you look at the actual history, the data tells a very different story. Okay, just take a look at this chart. It really shows you how wildly unpredictable stock market returns can be, even when you're looking at an entire decade. In the 1980s, you got a fantastic 21% compounded return. Awesome. But then you look at the entire decade of the 2010s, and the return was just 8%. That barely beat a simple fixed deposit. Think about that for a second. You took all the risk of being in the stock market for 10 whole years for practically no extra reward. This right here is exactly why going all in on stocks is a huge gamble, no matter how old you are. But unpredictable returns, that's not the only danger lurking. There's another huge risk that most investors, especially here in India, completely overlook, and that is the risk of your home currency. Just think about this for a moment. It's pretty staggering. Over the span of a single career, so basically since the early 90s, the Indian rupee has lost about 90% of its value against the US dollar. That is like an invisible riptide, slowly but surely pulling your wealth away. It's eroding your ability to buy things on a global scale, even if your investments in India seem to be doing well. And this is precisely why you have to think globally. Just look at this chart. The entire Indian stock market, it makes up less than 5% of the world's total market value. So if your portfolio is 100% invested in India, you are literally betting your entire future on this tiny little slice of the global pie. That's not smart diversification. That is a massive, massive concentration risk. All right, let's tackle another sacred cow of investing, shall we? I'm talking about the myth of buy and forget. You know the one. We all love this idea of just buying a great company and then holding on to it forever. It sounds so easy, so elegant, but in reality, it's a deeply flawed strategy. So the real question is, can you just go out, buy today's biggest blue chip stocks, and then, sleep soundly for the next 30 years? Well, history shows us that the list of what's considered a blue chip is anything but permanent. Let's get specific. Let's look at the original Sensex 30 index from way back in 1986. Of those 30 founding companies, the titans of their day, how many do you think are still in the index today? Only 11. That's it. The lesson here is crystal clear. Market leadership changes. Today's giants are absolutely not guaranteed to be the giants of tomorrow. And if you think that's something, This next number really shows you just how incredibly rare true long-term consistency is. Out of more than 4,000 listed companies in India, only one, just one, managed to go 20 straight years without a single year-on-year drop in profits. And that was HDFC Bank. So the idea that you can just pick the next HDFC bank in advance and then forget about it, you're betting against absolutely astronomical odds. I mean, the stock market is just littered with the ghosts of these former blue chips. We're talking about companies that were once household names. Think about Hindustan Motors, the makers of the Ambassador car, or Premier Automobiles. These were giants, and now they're either irrelevant or completely gone. Buy and forget can very, very easily turn into buy and regret.
Okay, so if buy and forget is a myth, then what's the alternative? What are you supposed to do? Well, that brings us to our next section, and this might be the most neglected yet most important part of investing: rethinking your exit strategy. And there's this really powerful principle from Davina Mehra that I think sums it all up. She says, entry can be wrong, exit shouldn't be. Think about that. You can mess up when you buy a stock, that happens. But your plan for when you're going to sell that stock, that has to be disciplined. It has to be free of emotion. That's where the real skill is.
So how do you do that? Well, here's a really practical tool to build that discipline. First, forget about price targets. Instead, use what's called a trailing stop loss. Let's say you set a 25% rule for yourself. You buy a stock at 100. It goes up to 200, awesome. Now your mental sell trigger isn't based on your original 100 rupee purchase price. It's now 25% below the new peak of 200. So if the stock drops back to 150, you sell, no questions asked. What this system does is it forces you to let your winners run, but it automatically cuts your losers short. And the best part? It takes your emotions completely out of the equation.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. We've busted some of the biggest myths out there. So now it's time to build a new playbook, a smarter way forward.
And the very first thing you have to understand is the type of game you're actually playing. See, professional investing, it's what's known as a loser's game. And that doesn't mean you're destined to lose. It means the game isn't won by the person who hits the most spectacular home runs. It's won by the person who makes the fewest big mistakes. Your number one goal suddenly shifts from trying to find the next huge winner to simply avoiding that one catastrophic loss.
So here it is, your new playbook, based on everything we've just talked about. First, your number one job isn't picking stocks, it's asset allocation. And your number one priority isn't chasing returns, it's managing risk. Next, you don't just invest in your home country, you go global. You stay invested, sure, but not blindly. And most importantly, you have a clear, unemotional exit rule in place before you even click the buy button.
And that really brings us to the final thought I want to leave you with. Investing isn't a game of luck. It's not about chasing hot tips you saw online. It is a strategic game of avoiding major, costly errors. So the question you need to go back and ask yourself, looking at your own portfolio, is this: is my strategy actually built to win a loser's game? Thanks so much for joining me.